Welcome again to Virtual Voices. I'm Elizabeth Peruch. I have the pleasure of ensuring alumni of the Leadership Foundation stay engaged and informed. We created Virtual Voices to ensure that that was able to continue given our stay-at-home orders and doing everything virtually, and this has been a wonderful success. We really created this so that we could hear from leaders across industries, across sectors about any important topic that we should be talking about. We've touched on a lot of COVID topics. We've touched on education and small business, and the conversation about race has continued to be an important one. And so we have dedicated several of these Virtual Voices to this conversation. Today is a very important one on race in the workplace. I will say that in our office, we have these conversations on a regular basis, and we are learning. We're growing, and we're trying. We're trying very hard to figure out how best to be here for you all, for our network. And so I want to thank you guys for joining us today. I will introduce our speakers in just one moment, but I want to start with a few reminders. We are recording this session, so you'll have access to it later. We do ask that you all stay on mute, as you know, unless we call on you to ask a question. We are going to be using the chat feature, so feel free to open up your chat box. This is where if you have any questions, you can chat it in there, and I will call on you to ask it out loud if you'd like to do that out loud. We'd love to do that. Recommend speaker view, and if you need any help, you can reach out to Megan Vivier. She is hosting our call for us today. She knows all. And I think those are all the reminders. You guys probably know these well. So now I'd like to thank our sponsors. We simply could not do the work of alumni engagement and spreading continued education and engagement across this community without these three sponsors. Molson Coors Beverage Company has been a long-standing partner of ours. They care deeply about what we offer and how we connect with our alumni, and we just couldn't do this work without them. Similar to Southwest Airlines, I mean, their values are so in line with our values, and we are so appreciative for their connection year in and year out on several different areas of what we work on. Same with TIAA. They are a partner that really understands the benefit of keeping our network connected with each other, and they're a huge supporter of ours. So I thank each of them. We may have folks on the call from these companies, and we deeply, deeply thank you for your support of the Leadership Alumni Network. So thank you. And now I am very honored to introduce our three speakers. We're very lucky to have these three. I think we're gonna have a really robust conversation. We're gonna learn some tips, some advice, and we're gonna really hear what's being done internally at companies and what we can do as a community within our companies. So first, let me introduce you to Helen Young Hayes. Hello, Helen. Thank you for joining us. She's a 20-year veteran of the financial industry. As the portfolio manager of Janus Worldwide and overseas funds, she built and invested a $50 billion franchise in global and international inequities. Helen founded Activate Workforce Solutions to to employment. She brings the same passion and dedication of investing in and discovering the potential of companies to investing in and discovering the potential of underserved men and women. And I'm very excited for her to tell you more about inclusive economy, which is something she's been leading. Next, please welcome Craig Smith. Craig currently serves as president and COO of ANGI Home Services, otherwise known as Home Advisor, and oversees 3,000 employees. As a fourth-generation Coloradan, raised in Colorado Springs, Craig naturally, of course, connected with El Pumar and became an El Pumar Fellow. It was after completing this fellowship program that he joined a technology and online marketplace in Denver called Service Magic, which we now know as Home Advisor. In 2007, the company merged with Angie's List and went public on the NASDAQ under the symbol ANGI. He has been at the center of all their growth and success, achieving the role of president and COO by age 32. Imagine that, by age 32. In addition to helping launch and guide several new startups in Denver, Craig continues to stay engaged in the nonprofit community on several leadership and board levels. And he currently lives in Denver with his wife, Amy, and 3 children. Welcome, Craig. Thank you for staying in Denver and sharing your success with all of us. Finally, I'd like to introduce Jason Thompson. I'm thrilled to get to know Jason and have his perspective here. Jason has 25 years of experience working in the DE&I space. He is currently the VP for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at WGU, that's Western Governors University. and has successfully led diversity work in a variety of corporate and academic positions. He has a track record of creating diversity and inclusion that are based on the unique characteristics of each company he has served. Jason has worked with the U.S. Olympic Committee and most recently was Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion at Techstars based in Colorado. And he also does DEI executive coaching and has a really interesting take on the conversation around diversity. So we're very happy to have you. Thank you so much for being here. I would love to start now with you, Helen. I'm gonna ask you our first question, if my computer would start working, but I know what it is. So Helen, welcome. I'd love to ask you, tell us more about what is it, why are we focused on this here, and what is it that you're doing with Inclusive Economy?
Well, thanks for having me, and good morning, everyone. I am the founder of Activate Workforce Solutions. I entered the space in 2015 because I want to end poverty for individuals in Colorado. And to understand why I did that, you would have to know that I'm the daughter of Chinese immigrants and that my parents came to this country on borrowed money and on full scholarship. They had lost everything during World War II, but thanks to the promise and potential of America, they ultimately landed our family in a small college town in Mississippi and sent 4 kids to Yale. So I'm the embodiment of the American dream, but also having been in the Deep South since the Civil Rights Movement, my life was really changed and altered by witnessing the social and economic apartheid that is the experience of African Americans acutely in the South, but also in across our nation. And so with that as an underpinning, and I spent 20 years on Wall Street and then launched my second career, my first calling 5 years ago. During the darkest days of the pandemic, when none of my employers were recruiting and placing my talent, and my talent comes from underserved, overlooked populations. At Activate, we connect individuals with full-time, full benefit career path jobs. And we're looking for transformation and economic mobility as we activate them to their fullest potential through the dignity of work. But anyway, during COVID, when the whole economy shut down and none of my employers were recruiting anyone, I had some time to think about the world as it is today and how I wanted to be transformed by this once in a century experience. And more importantly, how I wanted the world to be transformed by this once in a century experience, which really revealed that my population that we serve at Activate, people from underrepresented communities, get hit the hardest, get hit the fastest, and recover the slowest, if at all, from economic recession, particularly the pandemic that we're in now. And so I had enough time to think some deep thoughts about maybe I could be not just a thought leader, but also a change agent in our community to challenge and inspire business leaders to rebuild, this time with equity, inclusion, and diversity in mind as a goal, as a common goal. And so I launched the Inclusive Economy movement, which is a movement it's a business-led CEO movement of intent, design, and sustained action towards building a multicultural, racially diverse and inclusive economy. And our call to action is really threefold. One, we're asking companies to do the hard work of building truly multicultural workforces. And Jason can tell you so much more about that. But no more lip service, no more empty platitudes, no more cosmetic changes. What we're looking for and calling people to is sustained, committed, deep, transformative system level change within your organization to transform your workforce, to be a place of inclusiveness and belonging and psychological safety for people of color, and equal opportunity and shared opportunity and prosperity. The second call to action is recognize that we have a two-tiered economy because we have a two-tiered talent pipeline. And so we must invest in the upskilling, the reskilling, and the new skilling of talent, particularly people of color, so that they may acquire and succeed in those habits, mindsets, disciplines, technical and professional skills that will be needed to propel them to economic mobility in the 21st century. And then our third call to action is invest in the whole ecosystem. Invest in and partner with minority-owned businesses in your supply chain and procurement practices. So that's the inclusive economy movement. What has been amazing about it, and Craig Smith from Home Advisor is one of our founding members, we have hit the mother lode of intent and common desire and commitment towards building the kind of community that we all want to be a part of, that we all long to be a part of, one that is that offers shared opportunity and shared prosperity for people of color. And so this is a really, really exciting journey because I believe that we're at a moment in history when we can change the narrative of Colorado if we work together for the long haul, with sincerity, with muscle, with intelligence, and with our hearts. And so that is the inclusive economy movement. And I'm, as you can tell, passionate about this opportunity that we have in our community.
Thank you for sharing that, Helen. I think, yeah, you bring up that point of we need to go beyond just performative action. We need to start doing the work. And so you're helping to do that. So I thank you for that. Craig, I want to bring you in and have you, we've talked prior to this just about the work you're doing at Home Advisor and really where your passions lie, but tell us a little bit more about what you're doing at Home Advisor to kind of operationalize some race equity and what you've learned from the past that will change things for you moving forward.
Yeah, well, first of all, good to see you all, and thank you for having me. I'm really honored to be a part of this discussion. You know, to maybe start with just to follow on to Helen's comments, which is kind of the second part of your question around what is different now. And I can't say enough for the work that Helen's done so quickly to get a large group of leaders across the state energized and committed to the long journey as opposed to kind of short-term band-aids and fixes and kind of checking boxes. Because, you know, one thing that I've realized through this is that it is a long arc of change, and, you know, the historic pattern of seeking near-term remedies that allow us to, you know, appease our employees or say that, yes, look, we're taking action and we care about this, is, I don't think, something that works over the long haul. And so I think we have a group of leaders that have assembled that are committed to the time it takes to really create cultural change within our organizations, and are committed to doing that. And so that was one of the big insights, you know, that I've reached throughout this, is that it's not a matter of, you know, what are we going to do over the next 6 months to change the composition of our workforce? But more importantly, what are we going to do to change the culture from the top down that elevates diversity, equity, and inclusion at the highest level of our core values? Because if it's not a core value that is at parity with all the other core values that we live on a daily basis, and if every single employee is not thinking through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, change is really difficult. And so, you know, it starts with that, but this is big cultural change within a company of 4,500 employees. So we can't expect immediate remedies. Where we've started from an we're operationalizing it through a few steps. You know, we first started by a lot of listening and a lot of learning. You know, we recognize that we certainly don't have all the answers, and a lot of what's been done in the past has failed. So there aren't models out there that you can just go replicate. Traditionally, we would do that with, you know, other parts of the business. We'd say, who's doing it well? Let's go, you know, take what's working and apply it to our organization. Well, there aren't great models out there. We wouldn't be where we are if there were great models out there that we could go replicate. But there are great resources. There are great people who have been thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion for a very long time, are very thoughtful about it. And so I'm spending a lot of time just meeting with people, meeting with leaders in other organizations, meeting with companies and individuals that specialize in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then one of the most important things that I think we've done at the outset is the C-level leadership is engaged in unconscious bias training. I think we've failed a bit in the past because we look around at each other and say, I'm not a racist. I don't exhibit, racist behaviors. I look at everybody equally. And I was completely unaware of the unconscious bias that exists within all of us that definitely influences the decisions we make. So I may not be consciously shaping our organization in a certain way, but unconsciously I absolutely am. And, you have to start by being aware of the bias that we all possess. And then the other thing that was very eye-opening to me is the difference between individual and structural and institutional racism. And again, like I look at it through my own personal lens and say, I don't hold these views, so, and nor does our leadership. So we're okay. Well, you're really not. The kind of change that, you're looking to make and the positive impact to create an inclusive workforce where people of all backgrounds feel welcome, requires real structural and cultural change to occur. And so, again, we started with this unconscious breaking the bias training with our C-level executives, and then we're building that into the rest of the organization so we can create a common understanding, a common language, a common foundation upon which we can build over time. But it really just needs, for us as a leadership team and as an organization, that training needs to be the spark that creates curiosity and a deeper level of learning for all of us. We have to be committed to this journey of learning. And I think that's the other thing that this first step has done for us, is that we're all now talking about conversations we're having or research we're doing or podcasts that we're listening to. And it's enlightening and powerful. These conversations weren't happening before. Now we have to assure that they last for many years and it becomes core to the fabric of the organization, and not something that once employees are not asking us what our position is and what we're going to do, we are still doing. It is just part of our culture forever, and that's where real change will come. So that's where we've been focused. We've also done a lot of, I guess I would say, I've taken a lot of some of the more traditional steps in forming a diversity, equity, and inclusion council. Those are, I think, really tricky to do right, because shifting the burden of that work on employees that you're trying to support is not the objective. And so structuring the council, we're very thoughtful about the charter and how we'll interact and work with our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council. We're forming ERGs to support employees across multiple groups. And I guess the last thing I would mention that I think has been very enlightening from my perspective is it's not just a workplace conversation for us. Workplace is a big part of it. We definitely want our employees of all backgrounds to feel welcome and included, and the power of being able to, we're a talent business. We need to be able to recruit top talent. And so, by creating that environment, I think it is a big strategic advantage for us. The other piece of this, though, is our marketplace. We serve over 30 million homeowners, over 250,000 service professionals are part of our marketplace. Our business is all about bringing people together to solve their home improvement needs. And when you begin to look at the way our business operates, again, just the unconscious bias, the structural racism, institutional racism that exists, there are a lot of opportunities within our marketplace to get a lot better. But you have to look at things through a DE&I lens to identify those, and looking at how, just look at business ownership and participation within our marketplace and success within our marketplace of Black-owned businesses, women-led businesses, on down the line. And how well are we supporting those customers? We just kind of looked at our customers as a monolithic base. And by doing that, you don't see the nuance, and it's untangling that nuance. So I guess I'll leave it with that. That's how we're thinking about it.
No, that's fascinating. And I appreciate you acknowledging where your unconscious bias were and taking that on and realizing you think you have it figured out, but you don't, and taking ownership of that. So thank you. I respect that. Jason, you and I have had we had a conversation prior to this, and I really appreciate it, but you have a different take on how we look at diversity, this practice versus theory. Can you expand on that for the group?
Yeah, and actually Craig kind of touched on this. A lot of the diversity work hasn't, given very good returns. People are disappointed and frustrated with it because a lot of it's theory. And it sounds great, but it's rarely about what am I supposed to be doing in the workplace. And so over the years, I've launched 4 different diversity programs in 4 different industries. I do a lot more stuff based on data and collecting the right data points so that you can actually hold the organization accountable. I have stopped doing surveys, have done surveys in probably 10 years. And then one of the reasons I don't do surveys is I have yet to meet any CEO or leader of a company who would change their company based on one survey. And because it doesn't sound logical, right? I have 99% of the people are happy and one person isn't. Why would I change my company? Well, in many cases, there might only be one woman or one person of color in that department. And if all their peers say, this is great, and that one person of color says they don't like it, the whole thing is structured so that their voice means nothing because it's not statistically significant. Well, we already know people of color and women are underrepresented. If we use this survey instrument, all it does is reproduce the institutionalized racism that already exists. And people are always like, well, how are we supposed to get opinions? Well, even if you get that opinion, you can't use it. And the reason you can't is they're typically done because they're supposed to be anonymous. Well, by definition, if we have one survey in which somebody says they're unhappy, I can't go to that department and say, hey, someone's unhappy, because why? They filled out the survey in their assumption that it's anonymous. And I would be violating that principle. So the only way to get around that is you take that person who might be in marketing and say, well, let's combine marketing with communications so that it creates some sense of anonymous. But now you take a person who might have been 10% of the response rate, add them to a group of 50 people. Now they're what, 3% of that? There's even less reason to listen to that person. And it's further exacerbated if there's 4 or 5 people in the department and one of them had the courage to speak up, we still ignore that one person. We never validate their experience. So I stopped doing that because it just made it worse. People would then come to me and say, well, I told you what was going on. Why didn't you do anything? Well, I can't, because by doing it, I'm violating this confidence that we did in the context of this survey. So I stopped doing it. And there's still other ways to get that data. And that's why I started collecting data, because you can better hold a company accountable by looking at who's being promoted, when promotions are made, who's being terminated. There's a lot of data points that will tell you about your diversity program. And I found much more success doing that, moving away from some of the traditional things that typically are done, surveys. I don't do mandatory trainings. I haven't done mandatory trainings in 10 years. Typically, people don't like them. And so they show up with such a terrible attitude, they show up and just check the box. And it's reproduced the problem that we're seeing, because people assume, oh, we have this diversity program, and I go to the training, I check the box, and now I'm done. I go back to do whatever I was doing before. So as a result, we've taught people that these are episodes. We train around episodes, and then when it's done, you go back to something else. And they don't see this as a series of events that create problems. Because you think about it, when I first started my career, it was Rodney King. Pretty much the same exact incident, was it 20, 30 years later, the same exact incident, and it never changed. And what was our response 30 years ago? We did all this one-time training that everybody thought, oh, we've been trained, we're over this now, and we go back to the whatever we were doing before. So as a result, even in this current era, when I'm doing diversity training, I got a lot of pressure. Oh, we need all this training. We got to do all this training around this. And I was like, no, this is not an episode. What we need to do is create a systematic solution that looks like the problem, that we have to have fundamental trainings that happen all the time, that are made available to employees. And so that they realize, no, this isn't a one-time thing. This is who we are as an organization. We will have regular training every month. We will have conversations. We will do things that will probably make you uncomfortable. But that is fundamentally what has to happen if we're going to have long-term change. And so a lot of the theory isn't very helpful because it's theory. They've never actually had the job. And you'll see that most books that are around diversity and inclusion is people I'm sure are very smart, but a lot of it, they'll tell you, oh, you need CEO commitment. Okay, of course I do, but what does that look like? And does the CEO know what commitment looks like? How does he know how to, or she, I guess that's my own bias, right? How does she know how to hold the organization accountable for the behaviors that they see? And typically the best way to do that was with data. And so I've moved everything to kind of a database diversity program so that I can provide the kind of training that we should have provided at the time when it's needed and train the person who's actually the problem. That's the other thing we do. We train everybody and hope that person gets it. Instead of going, no, where are the problems? Let's train that person. And does that person know they're the problem? And they may or may not. And we can train and then hold them accountable because we say, hey, we trained you on X, Y date. You know, it's 6 months later, we still see the same behavior. And then we can hold people accountable. The CEO, she can then agree with me. I can see what you've done here, Jason. I can see when the training started. Now I know how to hold my company accountable. And so that's why I've moved just really towards a heavily data-based diversity plan. And just moved away from some of the traditional things that we've been taught, you know, to do within diversity programs, because most of it's just theory and it doesn't really work.
Wow, Jason, so much of what you said is really useful to hear right now. I mean, just even internally in our organization, surveys are what we are doing. And I think you give us some thoughts on how to rethink this. So I sure appreciate that. I hope others got some good stuff. I wrote down a lot. We have a question in the chat feature. Stephanie, I don't know if you would like to unmute and ask your question. You're welcome to. I'm happy to ask it for you. I'll give you a second to see if you unmute.
Thank you. I didn't realize I was going to be put on the spot, but thank you.
Surprise.
No, so I kind of wanted to hear from the speakers, like what setbacks or pushbacks you've had or faced, and what did you do to overcome or address it so you can continue or start your DEI track? Because I think one of the biggest things, and at least in my organization, is that I think we have the buy-in and from the CEO, but I think the problem is not going to be so much from the CEO, but like the pushback and the biases that I will receive from other leadership or managers or people, our staff in general.
Well, the first to unmute. I'm watching the speakers. Jason, all yours.
Sure. Data. I know I keep saying this, and I'll tell you why it works, because when I worked at the U.S. Olympic Committee, I actually created a way to measure diversity within the U.S. Olympics. They still use it to this day. You can Google like USOC, you know, diversity scorecard. And the reason it worked is because you will get pushback. There's no doubt about it, because most people feel like, well, I don't see that as a problem. It doesn't exist. But if I have data, guess what? I have proof it exists and I have proof that there is a problem. So for example, I'll call out USA Hockey, for example. When I first started, you know, we looked at their data. They had, I don't know, 100 plus employees, and I don't think they had one person of color. That's statistically impossible because number one, you don't have to be a hockey fan to work in hockey. And so when I created these tables, it was fair to them. So we compared them to other sports, but it was made public. And all of a sudden USA Today picked it up, CNN picked it up, and they had to start answering questions about, well, this is interesting. How is it possible you don't have any people of color? What's going on at USA Hockey? And once they had to start answering those questions, it got a whole lot of motivation. They actually have their own diversity officer at this point. The organization moved. These data points, and I don't want to overstate it, but having that will impact change, and it'll help you overcome this pushback, because you will definitely get pushback. And in my mind, that's of course a place where CEO commitment is important, right? That they'd say, we're committed to this. We know people aren't going to like it, but we have to continue on this road. But also remind people, this isn't a one-time thing. You know, a lot of times people think, and this is another reason why I think one-time mandatory training doesn't work, because it's created this mindset on whatever your opinion is, that we can do this once and it's done. So it's, oh, they're resisting. If I force them to training, they'll change, and they will not. Like, our opinions take a long time. Like, if you'd have met me in college, I was completely homophobic. You know, there's no excuse for that kind of behavior. That's exactly who I was. But here it is, you know, 30 years later, different opinion. It took time for me to change that opinion. You're not going to do it on a one-time training. So don't put this overemphasis on if we just force everybody to train or you get this immediate resistance. Yeah, of course. If you're not racist, I can't make you racist in 45 minutes. And by the same token, I can't undo it in 45 minutes. So, you know, you have to commit to this journey of, it's going to be ongoing training. We're going to continue to commit to this and push people to learn and challenge them from where they're at, and know that that's just part of the process. This is a journey.
Craig, please.
I guess that's what's on me because I unmuted. I think Jason's points are spot on and really important. the data element of it is critical and something that we're taking a hard look at, like I said, within the marketplace as well as within the workplace. I do think that the unconscious bias underpinning, though, at least getting everybody on the same page with that is really important across all employees, because I don't think there is a broad sweeping recognition of how those biases influence our decisions from a day-to-day perspective. And so I think that it may be, and it's not really a one-time training. The way we're thinking about it is all new employees that come through the door would participate, and that it is something that is ongoing. But I think that foundational piece, from my lens, is really important. But I also think it leads to part of the answer to the question, which is, what have the obstacles been? And a lot of the obstacles for us has been fear of making mistakes and doing it wrong, and not having a well thought out plan that is going to lead to the outcomes that we seek and that we desire. And I think we have to accept that we will make mistakes along the way. I certainly don't have all the answers. We certainly don't have all the answers. But across the state, we don't have the answers. We'd be in a very different place if we did. But if you have very sincere and genuine intent of getting better and of improving, I think you get a little bit of latitude from the employees and from the organization, and not letting that fear of failure or making mistakes get in the way of progress, and just taking some action in a positive direction. But that has been an impediment to us. We've just been fearful of, what is the best path forward? How should we do this? Who should we bring in? What should we do? And then it's like, well, we're not going to get all those answers. Let's just take a genuine step toward the right direction, and we'll make some mistakes and figure it out as we go. But that, going back to my point in the opening remarks, is part of that longer arc and longer term commitment over time of elevating DE&I as a core value and something that we're committed to over the long term.
Thank you, Craig. Helen, did you want to add anything?
I think I'll get more specific with respect to what are some of the obstacles and barriers. I think really understanding, having a close ear to the ground and understanding your employees and their own experiences, being extremely attuned to, for example, single parents during COVID. What a challenge it's been for the single parents on our staff who, for the first time, are learning how to telework. They've never teleworked before. Navigating the lack of childcare, which they had relied on. Navigating how do I even do a 40-hour week when I've got a 1-year-old at home who I can't take to childcare. And so I think really listening to and watching for the incredibly varied and diverse experience that can fall with real hardship upon people of color. And so I think that has required of us just being really great listeners, being empathetic, being very, very creative problem solvers, and a great communication.
Thank you, Helen. I appreciate that. I want to move to a question that we got during registration. One of our guests asked this, and I wonder if you're on this call. Jennifer DiGiallorondo, I'm sure I didn't bring that right, but I'm going to ask this question on your behalf. If you want to unmute and follow up, then please do. But she asked, and this is really getting into the nuts and bolts of questions that I imagine a lot of folks have, but how can an employer get a diverse group of applicants? And do you require equity, diversity, and inclusion training? So this is right on the heels of what you guys were saying. Craig, I know you do, where you require that now coming in. But I think if I could broaden this question a little bit is, what strategies can you guys offer to this group about finding diverse groups of applicants? And what do we need to do internally to ensure that we are ready to ensure that people of color are accepted and welcomed and feel like they belong in that workplace? Helen, you're already unmuted, so we can start with you.
Well, I feel very strongly about the importance of leveling the hiring field and removing the reliance on what I'll call irrelevant credentials as a way to screen out as many applicants as possible, rather than a focus on screening in and assessing people for transferable skills, competencies, and experiences. And so, for example, the reliance on a 4-year college degree, you have all automatically excluded the majority of your applicants of color when you have a reliance upon a credential that is typically not attained by people from a certain socioeconomic stratus or from an ethnic or racial group. And so I would really question the way that Stanford. And so I'm preaching to myself. But I did that because I had thousands of applicants and I needed to whittle it down to a very, very, very few for 10 roles that we would hire for. And so that screened out, of course, so many African Americans, for example. And so, so leveling the hiring field. Additionally, looking for talent from non-traditional pipelines. And so we work, for example, with a very large wealth management, prominent wealth management company that is global. And we help them recruit candidates for their customer service representative positions. We help them first of all, we understand that they're looking for people who have great interpersonal skills and a lot of drive. And so we look for individuals who come from bartending, for example, because they can think on their feet really quickly. They're great with customers. They're good at multitasking, and they're high energy. So we really try to think very broadly about, okay, who are the types of individuals? What sort of cross-industry careers might they have where they have transferable skills? And so we reach into a much more diverse talent base. And lastly, I would say partner with organizations that are involved in upskilling, reskilling, and new skilling. And so it could be youth apprenticeship programs, it could be community college, et cetera. Don't just recruit from CU and CSU, because you're automatically looking at a very white base. So diversify your own talent practices.
Great advice. You have to do the work to find them. Craig, Jason, anything from you? Jason, you unmuted first.
Okay. I would recommend you do an actual search. And I say that in jest, but the reality I found is in my last 3 companies, I've had a pretty senior position, and generally I was the only person of the senior leadership team who didn't know each other before they got a job there. And the reason is they did an actual search. And so that's how they found me. And in many companies, I'll find if I hire staff, I'll have the only staff that didn't know somebody before they got a job there. So we do have this ingrained habit of just hiring our friends, and we need to break that. I mean, that's kind of just a simple thing, like stop hiring your friends. That's usually what happens, number one. And so as a result, the other thing that happens is typically there's no diversity, because if you hire your friends, you typically hire people just like you. The second thing, and Helen made this point, but on a very practical level, I always tell people, you need to begin hiring on potential, not on what I've done before. Because if people of color and women have been systematically removed from these systems, and the criteria is, have you done it before? You will never get a candidate of color because no one's opening the door. We're always in the situation where we don't have that skill set. You haven't done it before. Instead of looking at me and saying, do you have the potential? Do you have the skill set to do this? Is a whole different conversation, and that opens the door to more candidates. The other thing I would say, again, I harp on this data thing, and the reason I do is, especially the bigger the company is, the more overwhelming the hires get. You should actually know where you need diversity, because usually what we find is entry-level positions tend to be very diverse. It's as they get more senior, we see less diversity. And if you have limited resources, you should be focusing on those positions in which you need diversity, not on every single position, because in some you'll find whatever we're doing is working. Like we have women, we have people of color, and generally that's what happens. So you don't have to have a rule that impacts the entire company. You have to have strategic rules that apply to these positions when they come available, so you actually have a skill and a plan to execute on. And so in the past, that's what we've done. We just identified these are the positions. When they become available, we have a plan to identify diverse candidates. And a lot of times it's just almost every university has a diversity officer. You should have them within your network. You should just be pinging them. You should just very directly connect with organizations. And Helen made a very good point of this. A lot of times what I see is people say, oh, I'll go to historical black colleges. I don't have a problem with historical black colleges, but who doesn't go there? And if you're not a big company, you go there, you'll be invisible. San Diego State is one of the most diverse universities in the country. No one thinks to go there. You know, people of color live all over the country. You can find people of color if you're actually looking. What I find is most people don't do a genuine search, number one. But number two, it's so broad and overwhelming that the recruiting team is just overwhelmed. They need strategy. They need to identify which positions should we really be active on? Where are they? And typically they're your senior level positions. And if you begin to do that and have a strategy, you can actually overcome it. I remember I was in a company where we had 7 leadership hires after we implemented our plan. Of those 7 hires, 5 of them were people of color and women. And all we had to do is put in a strategy for those leadership positions. Prior to that, we were just doing this broad, hey, diversity is important, every position is important kind of thing. It just didn't work because you don't have the bandwidth to do that. But once you have a focused, plan and strategy, you can execute on it. And that would be my recommendation, that you should identify those plans, you should identify those positions, and have a strategy built for those positions.
I just want to add one little practical nugget, because what we have done when we've been in the search for new candidates, we write in big letters, women and minorities encouraged to apply, because women and minorities tend to screen themselves out because they do not feel that they might have the perfect relevant experience. And so we actively encourage women and minorities to apply to our roles. And we think that we get a much better yield because we are specifically inviting people to apply.
That's great. Craig, do you want to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think a lot of great points have been made. The one piece to reiterate Jason's point around data is really de-averaging the data and taking a hard look at the full hiring funnel. And that's inclusive of where is our recruiting flow coming from, and then what is happening once we bring a candidate in, what's the fall off rate, de-averaged, look across all the various groups to understand that. Look at the retention of employees by various segments, because you'll find that there is a difference, and then that can point to opportunities for improvement and kind of hotspots, as Jason was identifying, where, within certain parts of the organization or certain teams, there is a low retention rate of employees, people of color, whatever the segment that you want to look at, and it allows you to hone in and really focus energy there. The other thing, and we've been doing a lot of listening and talking to employees, and some interesting feedback I've received from current and former employees is, there are a lot of cues when somebody comes in for an interview, if there ever is a thing as in-person interviews, hopefully sometime, but they're looking around and saying, is this a place that's for me? Do I see a career and a path here? One individual said to me, I came in and I love the organization. I saw some diversity on the floor, but I saw no people of color in leadership roles when I walked in. And so I said to myself, this is not a place for me. There's no path. I couldn't envision, getting to that level, and that's my aspiration. And so I walked away. And so we lost a really high caliber candidate because they couldn't see a path for themselves. Feedback from members of the LGBTQ community saying, I walked in, I interviewed, and I picked up on certain cues, and I didn't feel like this was an environment for me. And so I passed on the opportunity. And there are things and signals that I hadn't been aware of or thinking about, but we lost really high caliber, high quality candidates because of that. So identifying those situations and improving upon and assuring that people of all backgrounds feel welcome is just, as I said earlier, a big strategic advantage. There's really talented people who did not accept roles within our organization because of those cues. And so I think, taking a hard look at the data and the fallout rates and the full funnel from a hiring perspective, and then being more aware and sensitive to those cues, you can get it from employees. I got this from just conversations I had across the organization and by taking the time to do it.
I wish we had another half an hour. I have a lot of questions coming through privately to me. I want to hit on one because it's a good follow-up to this. Channing Evans, if you would unmute and ask your question. And before you do, I would like to say to everybody else that has questions that submitted prior to or sending them to me in the message, I may ask Jason, Craig, and Helen if you guys would be willing to help answer some of these questions via email, and we can send them as part of the recap, because there's some really good ones that I want to make sure we get answered. But for now, this is a great follow-up. So Channing, the mic is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm curious to get the speaker's perspective. What's the best way to engage current employees of color in that organization in their D&I efforts so that they feel supported by the company?
I'm watching for that unmute. Jason wins it.
I said I'm a kind of a non-traditional diversity officer. So, and I'll say this, and I don't mean to be rude about it, but the hardest thing is that question. Like, there isn't one best way. People who are African-American, or there's a whole diversity of people who might want to be called African-American, want to be called Black. How we engage with that community would be totally different how I might engage with women or LGBTQ. You know, there's all this intersectionality. So as a woman of color or as an African-American woman, you might have a totally different experience, and how we engage with you will be unique to you. And so it's a complicated question. And I think sometimes because we want easy answers, we go for the easy answer, when in fact we were saying that this is a complicated thing, and we will always learn as a company. That our goal as a company should be, we should always be actively learning, always trying to find ways to engage with our employees. And so I'm not diminishing the question. I'm just pointing out sometimes that where we frame these questions perpetuates stereotypes, that there's this assumption that all people of color are the same. So if you just told me what to do, I could just fix it. And it just doesn't work that way. It's a complicated intersection. And the analogy I typically give is, some people go by Dave and some people go by David. Now, should we just organize the world and tell all the Daves and Davids, hey, if you guys could just make your mind up, get together, and you got to choose Dave or David? I mean, that assumption would be ridiculous. But we do that with people of color all the time. We say, hey, you know what, Jason, if you could just tell us, is it African-American or is it Black? I need to know. It ain't that easy. This is complicated work, and you had better be convinced that we have a journey that we need to get on together, and that's going to be the solution. So I understand the gist of the question, and I don't mean to belittle it, but I think we—
No, not at all. Point taken. No, preach on, brother. This is
okay.
great.
All right. And so, you know, and I think as organizations, if we looked at our employees and realized, hey, our employees are complicated. They have very nuanced lives. For some people, it's because they have kids, it's because of their race, and sometimes it's the intersection of all those things at the same time. And we always have to take our diversity programs in that context of how are we innovating, how are we continue to making sure we're meeting the needs. Because I can tell you, almost every diversity program I've ever created has been unique to that organization. But also right now, we're doing things we weren't doing 10 years ago, partly because we have COVID, and that complicates the situation for many parents, but also at the same time, for many of our African-American employees, there's a lot of stress and a lot of sense of their personal angst that they're feeling, that they're bringing to work. And for many of our leaders who are not of color, they don't understand that context. Like, for them, many times they're like, well, I don't understand it. Why is it so personal to you? That happened 3 states away. How does that have anything to do with you? And not understanding for many people of color is, no, I see myself there. I see my child there. This is horribly painful for me. And some days I don't have the energy to come here. That is just too much. And then when I come here, I have to explain to the whole world what's going on. Like, I have to explain why some people are in the street. I have to, you know, defend behaviors that I are heavy for me, just like they are for you. And so there's a whole different type of diversity program we're doing now than we did 10 years ago, because we're providing services we didn't before. I do a lot of just one-on-one listening that I didn't do half as much before. And so I think the answer here is, it's complicated. We remain complicated, but we have to be committed to this journey.
I love that. I'll ask a final question unless Helen or Craig, do you guys want to add anything to that? Beautiful. I do hate that we have to wrap this soon. This has been a really remarkable conversation, full of great tips and ways to think about this differently. I want to leave us with one, and this is what we always finish these calls with, is if each of you could just give our audience some, and we've done a lot of this, so it'll be hard to kind of recap it all and ask you to do it again, but if you could identify something that we can do as a leadership community to help move this work forward within our companies, to help make race in the workplace a topic that comes up, these conversations help. What can we do to move this forward and to help. But Craig, you unmuted first, so you're on, my friend.
Well, I was going to give a plug for Helen because I actually think that if you are a CEO or if your CEO has expressed, passion and interest in positive change, encourage them to join the Colorado Inclusive Economy. The momentum there is so strong, and it's extraordinarily valuable for us because I already have resources and connections and people that I can reach out to and say, hey, we're dealing with this. What are your thoughts? And it's a group of like-minded individuals who share the same direction and passion. And that's what's so important. I fortunately have a really good friend that works in diversity, equity, inclusion. I have a resource that I can call and say, hey, we're thinking about this. And he's been pivotal in helping us, move things forward. But without having that, this is really hard work. And so that community is extraordinarily important. So I will give the pitch on Helen's behalf. I think the momentum and the work that group has done so far is going to be really important for our state. And there's such good momentum and good people there. So encourage your leadership. If you are a leader, get involved. It is a really great movement.
Thanks, Craig. I don't need to do my ask, but yes, check us out on www.inclusiveeconomy.us, and please join our movement because Rome wasn't built in a day. We can't dismantle decades and centuries of systemic racism and injustice unless we all work together to build a more perfect and inclusive economy. And so please check us out, join us. And I would just add on a personal note, please, as Jason and Craig have pointed out, educate yourselves, educate your children, educate your spouse, read The New Jim Crow, read White Fragility, talk about this, educate, discuss, and then do. So get involved, don't sit on the sidelines, do something about this. In whatever way, with whatever partners you want to do it with, but please get involved. We all need to own our future together.
Beautiful, thank you. Jason.
Yeah, I guess I tend to be different and overly practical. Here's one recommendation I would make. Generally, all of you are leaders. You have an opportunity to make a hire. And generally what I've gotten in the past is, hey, make the hire, make the offer, and they give you a window, a salary window that you can pay within. I immediately pay at the top if it's a woman or a person of color. I don't even question it. I just pay them right at the top. Now, the last time I did, I got 5 phone calls questioning my competence all the way to the CEO. And I finally said, look, we know these disparities exist. If I, as the chief diversity officer, don't make a commitment to change and make sure that women and minority are paid fairly, who will? Like, this is my personal obligation, and this is within my personal sphere of control. I'll just pay at the top of the range. You gave me a range. I'm supposed to have the wherewithal to do it. That's what I'm going to do. And that's the way we can make change. If we know women and minorities are systematically underpaid, when you get a chance to make change, make sure they're not systematically unpaid. Don't be a part of that. The second thing is, whenever I've been asked to present, this is of course when we do things in person, I always check to see if there's a ramp. And I always call that out, like, why is there no ramp here? If we're truly about being inclusive, it doesn't matter whether or not you thought somebody was going to be here in a wheelchair. It's that the assumption is, it doesn't matter. We're always inclusive, regardless of who's in the room, that this is one of our fundamental principles. And so I just thought these are the things that were in my own sphere of control. If I ever have a chance to make sure somebody's paid fairly, I'll make sure they get paid top of the scale. If I can point out there's opportunities for us to be inclusive, I point those opportunities out. Those would be my 2 suggestions.
I love it. I truly wish we had more time for this conversation. We will continue this conversation. As we wrap up, I'd like to ask the audience in the chat feature to just, I'm seeing a lot of wonderful thank yous and gratitude to our speakers, but if you could add in there also maybe a takeaway that you've gotten from this, something that you might take back to your office or a conversation you might have. We'd love to see what you've gotten from this as I close out. And you'll have to think and type fast because we only have 3 minutes. So love to see that, but I want to say thank you, Jason, Craig, and Helen. This truly was a wonderful conversation. My notes are all over the place, things that I'm very interested in bringing back to our office and beyond. So I appreciate your sentiments. I appreciate your expertise, your thoughts. It's going to go a long way. We will send out a recap of this, and for those of you who didn't have your questions answered, Jason, Craig, and Helen, I hope that you'll be willing to answer some of those via email, and we can include those because I think that'd be important. I appreciate that. We do have more virtual voices coming up. I would love to point out our next one scheduled is on mental health on September 10th. We're going to be talking to some folks doing some work in this area and just how important it is right now. And then what's not on here because we don't have it, the topic set, but we are going to be once a month ensuring we keep up with the conversation about race and equity. Not to say it's not going to be part of the conversation on September 10th also, but we so appreciate everybody that joined this call, the resources that you're putting in, the questions. Again, Jason, Craig, Helen, thank you so much. We appreciate you, and we will see you all on the next Virtual Voice.